We go to the doctor to be treated for our physical maladies. We have a pain or a lump, and the doctor knows how to evaluate our symptoms and ease our suffering. When our doctor recommends a course of treatment for a medical condition, we trust that they have our best interest in mind, wanting nothing more than to make us feel better. Sometimes, though, they destroy more than they fix. In September of 2020, a whistleblower came forward to allege that the Irwin County Detention Center in Ocilla, Georgia, which is owned and operated by a company called LaSalle Corrections, had, among other medical malpractices, performed forced sterilization on immigrant women being held at the facility. The whistleblower was a nurse at the facility and was concerned over the high number of hysterectomies being performed on detainees. When detainees were being questioned, one woman said that when she asked what procedure was being done, she was given 3 different answers by 3 different people. By December, more than 40 women had come forward testifying that they had received invasive and unnecessary medical procedures while under the care of Immigration and Customs Enforcement. This shocking and completely unethical behavior is far from the first time that people in the United States put the idea of eugenics into practice. People expressed outrage that the Nazi Party was practicing eugenics to breed out the Jews from their population, but Adolf Hitler actually adopted practices from the United States into his own legislation for the sterilization of quote-unquote defectives. Eugenics is pseudoscience aimed at improving the human race. It's the act of selectively breeding away all human beings deemed unfit, preserving only those who conform to a desired stereotype. Elements of the philosophy were enshrined as national policy enacted in 27 states, using forced sterilization and segregation laws as well as marriage restrictions. The word eugenics translates to good creation, and the Greek philosopher Plato may have been the first person to promote the idea. In his book, The Republic, he wrote about creating a superior society by procreating elite-class people together and discouraging breeding between the lower classes. He created a variety of mating rules to help create an optimal society. Men should only have relations with a woman when arranged by their ruler, and incestuous relationships between parents and children were forbidden, but not between brother and sister. Naturally. Francis Galton coined the term eugenics in his 1883 book, Inquiries into the Human Facility and Its Development. Francis tried to propagate his theory to the British elite, but they didn't bite. Americans, on the other hand, were much more open to the idea of creating a society that was more, shall we say, selective. In 1896, Connecticut made it illegal for people with epilepsy or who were, quote-unquote, feeble-minded to marry. Of course, the term feeble-minded never came with a test or a grading scale. It was just anyone that the eugenicists deemed too unintelligent to breed. In 1903, the American Breeders Association was created to study eugenics. Dr. John Kellogg, of Kellogg's cereal fame, a man whose name comes up in all sorts of strange places, organized the Race Betterment Foundation in 1911 and established a pedigree registry. Now, this wasn't a registry for purebred dogs. This was a registry so people could ensure they were proper breeding pairs. He even proposed contests for the offspring and awards for each pedigree. You know, like some type of show. Dr. Kellogg was a big fan of eugenics and focused mainly on race degeneracy, as he believed racial mixing and mental defects would damage the future of the human race. In 1904, the Carnegie Institution established a laboratory complex at Cold Springs Harbor on Long Island that collected millions of index cards on ordinary Americans. Researchers carefully plotted the removal of families, bloodlines, and entire cultures. Using that research, eugenics advocates pushed the theory on the legislatures of America as well as the nation's social service agencies and associations. Washington was the second state to pass a eugenics law, and it promoted the sterilization of people who were guilty of carnal abuse of a female person under the age of 10 years or of rape, and of habitual criminals. Very few sterilizations happened under this law, which was expanded in 1921 to include the sterilization of every patient in Washington state's mental hospitals. Not long after Washington's law passed in 1909, a eugenics law was passed in California, allowing for state institutions to sterilize those deemed unfit or, again, feeble-minded. The Asexualization Act gave the go-ahead for California to sterilize more than 20,000 men and women against their will. These decisions were made or backed by a board that was originally called the State Commission in Lunacy. Seems appropriate. Though the law looked like a way to keep people with mental illness from breeding, keeping them from passing down their supposed genetic defects, it was mostly used to force sterilize African Americans, Hispanics, and Asians. These practices were noticed early on in Adolf Hitler's life, and the prominence of forced sterilization in California really piqued his interest. It became his method of turning anti-Semitism into a medical issue. Instead of hating Jews, he was trying to make the world a better place, a purer place. Eugenicists in the U.S. pushed the issue by sending information directly to German officials. The German eugenics program was founded with help and funding from the Rockefeller Foundation. The acts of the Nazis were met with outrage by the rest of the world, and the theory of eugenics became stigmatized, but it didn't stop it from happening, not in the United States. Fannie Lou Townsend was born on October 6, 1917 in Mississippi to poor sharecroppers, Jim and Ella. She was the last of 20 siblings that would all work in the fields picking cotton on a Delta plantation in the sweltering Mississippi heat. Though she started picking cotton at the age of 6, she still managed to go to school between cotton seasons. This minor amount of schooling gave her the ability to read and write, making her the only one in the family that could do so. By the age of 12, she quit school and began working all year round. Outside of picking cotton, she would clean the plantation owner's house. Once the owner learned that she could read and write, he made her his timekeeper. Fannie Lou toiled away in the cotton fields for decades, picking hundreds of thousands, probably millions of pounds of cotton in her lifetime. Spending her life surrounded by the earthly aroma of raw cotton, this was where she met a man named Perry Hamer, who went by Pap, who was a tractor driver on the plantation. Some people thought that Pap was a mean-spirited guy, but Fannie Lou fell in love with his humor and easygoing attitude. Where Fannie Lou worried about what the future held, wanting to get out of the life of being a poor sharecropper, Pap was just happy to be alive. A nice walk by the river or a little time fishing was more than enough to make him happy. That and of course Fannie Lou. The couple married in 1944 and moved into a house on the plantation. Fannie saw this as a turning point that could give her life some purpose. She was now a wife and hopefully soon would be a mother. In the years after her marriage, Fannie Lou began quietly rebelling against the plantation owner. When the sharecroppers would come to settle up at the end of the season, the owner would usually find some way to cheat them out of money due. Fannie Lou would wait until he wasn't looking and would add the correct weight to the scale to make sure the farmers were being fairly compensated. By 1961, Fannie Lou and Pap had been trying to have children, but their efforts only resulted in 2 tragic stillbirths. Eventually, Fannie Lou had learned that she had a non-cancerous uterine cyst and was scheduled for a minor operation to have it removed. When she woke up from the operation, she was horrified to discover the white doctor had given her a hysterectomy. Throughout the 60s and 70s, forced sterilization of African Americans became so common in the South, they became known as a Mississippi appendectomy. Young black people, mostly women, would be told they needed some minor surgery, such as an appendectomy, and would wake up having been sterilized without their knowledge or consent. In 1968, Elaine Riddick arrived at a North Carolina hospital in labor with her first child. She was 14 years old and had gotten pregnant after being raped by a neighbor. Once she got to the hospital, she was placed in a cold, white, sterile room. The next thing she remembered was waking up with bandages covering her abdomen. Her baby was born healthy and was raised by her aunt. Elaine later got married and wanted children, but when she was 19 years old, a doctor told her that she had been sterilized. This was news to her. Apparently, back in 1968, a 5-person eugenics board had decided that she should be sterilized because she was feeble-minded and promiscuous. Promiscuous for being raped. Right. She would later say, "I felt like I was raped twice, once by the neighbor and once by the state." Again, one of the reasons for the sterilization was because Elaine was feeble-minded, but the eugenics board just made that up. There was no testing done, and Elaine went on to earn a degree in human services. She filed a lawsuit with the help of the American Civil Liberties Union in 1974, but the case dragged on for 9 years before ruling in favor of the defendants. The eugenics board who had arbitrarily chosen to sterilize her when she was just 14. The following year, the Supreme Court refused to hear her appeal. In the 1970s, 12-year-old Mary Alice Relf, 14-year-old Minnie Relf, and 17-year-old Katie Relf had all received shots of Depo-Provera without their knowledge of what the true purpose of the injections were. This was an injectable birth control drug, and at the time, Depo-Provera was not approved by the FDA because it had produced cancer in test animals. In June of 1973, Alabama officials convinced their illiterate mother to sign a form permitting their daughters to be sterilized. They told her that it was her consent to give her daughters birth control, but what they failed to mention was that the birth control would come in the form of a permanent sterilization. Mary Alice and Minnie were taken to the hospital where they were sterilized. When authorities came for Katie, she frantically locked herself in the bathroom and yelled, "I want to have children." One official responded coldly, "I don't think you need any." When Mary Alice and Minnie's parents realized that their daughters were sterilized without their knowledge, they filed a lawsuit with the help of the Southern Poverty Law Center. The case resulted in the prohibition of the use of federal funds for involuntary sterilization, not the prohibition of involuntary sterilization. They could still do that. They just couldn't use federal funds to do it. Nice. In 1972, 2 social workers showed up at Deborah Blackman's house and told her parents that she was, in the language of that time, severely retarded. They convinced her parents that it would be best if she was sterilized. She was 14 years old. Despite telling her parents she would have a tubal ligation, commonly referred to as having your tubes tied, they gave her a full hysterectomy. There was no official psychological diagnosis that Deborah had any form of mental deficiency. Despite the majority of the forced sterilizations happening due to racism, there were many other cases that were the result of prejudices against the mentally ill and less intelligent, what they referred to with their favorite word again as feeble-minded. Carrie Buck was born on July 3, 1906, to Emma Buck, who would eventually wind up in the Virginia State Colony for Epileptics and Feeble-Minded after being accused of immortality, prostitution, and having syphilis. Carrie was placed in a foster home with John and Alice Dobbs, and she attended public school where she was reported to be an average student, but her foster parents pulled her out of school in the 6th grade to have her stay at home and do housework. When Carrie was 17 years old, she was raped by Alice Dobbs' nephew, Clarence Garland, which resulted in her getting pregnant. So the Dobbses committed her to the same colony that her mother was in on the grounds of feeble-mindedness, incorrigible behavior, and promiscuity. There we go again calling a rape victim promiscuous. And she was feeble-minded? Well, what did you expect by pulling her out of school in the 6th grade so she could be your housemaid, assholes? On March 28, 1924, Carrie gave birth to a daughter, but she was deemed unable to care for the child, so her baby was given to the Dobbs, the same people who failed to properly care for Carrie as a child. Nice work. After that, Carrie was selected to be the first person in Virginia to undergo forced sterilization under Virginia's new Eugenical Sterilization Act. On October 19, 1927, Dr. John Bell performed a sterilization surgery on Carrie. That same year, Carrie filed a case with the Supreme Court, claiming the forced sterilization was a violation of her constitutional rights. The doctor claimed that Carrie was feeble-minded, had been born of a feeble-minded mother, and had given birth to a feeble-minded child. That was their reasoning for the sterilization. to remove this feeble-minded family's ability to unleash more feeble-mindedness on the world. They claimed that the mother, daughter, and granddaughter were all mentally deficient and it was clearly genetic, so they were putting an end to the production cycle. Except that wasn't true. Not much is known about Emma Buck, but Carrie was reported as being of average intelligence both before and after the procedure. The only time her daughter was examined for intelligence was when she was 6 months old. After that, she was also reported to be of average intelligence. The Supreme Court voted 8-1 that the procedure did not violate the U.S. Constitution. When the case was researched many years later, it was discovered that Carrie's own lawyer was a eugenicist and was close with many people on the defendant's side of the case. He intentionally sabotaged her. Not only did this case set a precedent that allowed over 24 other states to enact forced sterilization laws, Carrie's half-sister, Doris, was also sterilized after being told she needed an appendectomy. She tragically didn't learn why she wasn't able to conceive until she was much older in 1980. In 1977, Marie Sanchez, the chief tribal judge on the North Cheyenne Reservation, arrived in Geneva, Switzerland with a message to deliver to the United Nations Convention on Indigenous Rights. She told them that Native American women were undergoing a new version of genocide in the form of forced sterilization. Over the 6-year period that had followed the passage of the Family Planning Services and Population Research Act of 1970, physicians sterilized approximately 25% of Native American women of childbearing age. Some of the procedures went performed under pressures or duress or without the woman's knowledge or understanding. The law subsidized sterilization for patients who received their health care through the Indian Health Service or for Medicaid patients. This was happening while African American women were still being sterilized in the South and Hispanic women were being sterilized in the Southwest. Her message to the UN resulted in some federal regulations that offered Indigenous women some protections, but it didn't stop the practice from happening. Not at all. In Canada in 2021, a Senate committee had a hearing where they heard stories from 16 Indigenous women who had been involuntarily sterilized between 2005 and 2010, but the committee said they know of forced sterilizations happening as recently as 2019. Back in Mississippi in 1961, Fannie Lou was crushed when she found out that the doctor performed a hysterectomy and she would not have children of her own. She was already fed up with the way African Americans were being marginalized and wanted things to change. They didn't let the news stop them from having a family and would go on to adopt 2 children. When Fannie Lou was given the opportunity to become a community organizer for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, she couldn't turn it down. Over the years, she became a resonating voice that was not afraid to stand up for Black people in Mississippi. Part of that voice spoke out about the forced sterilization of Black women. Despite being a victim of the practice herself, she never made the issue about her. She made the issue about her community and how they were being treated. If they were truly free, they should be making their own decisions on whether or not they had children. That was a human right that nobody should be able to take away, no matter the color of your skin or your country of origin. In January of 2019, Wendy Dow was in the Irwin County Detention Center awaiting deportation back to Jamaica. She was awoken early one morning and taken to a hospital in handcuffs where she was told she was going to have surgery. When she asked why, she was told that she had cysts and masses on her uterus that needed to be removed. Despite feeling immense pressure to consent to the surgery, she stood her ground and was sent back to the detention center. Once she was back in Jamaica, a radiologist reported that her uterus was healthy, not swollen, and with no large cysts or masses on it. Then why exactly was she being pressured to have surgery? That answer would come from the women who had signed the consent. In December of 2020, more than 40 women signed a petition outlining alleged abuses by a gynecologist while in ICE custody at the Irwin Detention Center in Georgia. The petition read, "Petitioners were victims of non-consensual, medically unindicated and/or invasive gynecological procedures, including unnecessary surgical procedures under general anesthesia, performed by and/or at the direction of gynecologist Dr. Mahendra Amin. In many instances, the medically unindicated gynecological procedures respondent to men performed on petitioners amounted to sexual assault. These women have come forward after the whistleblower alleged that an alarmingly high number of hysterectomies were performed on Spanish-speaking women. She and other nurses feared that these women did not understand the procedures they underwent. Dr. Amin has become so notorious for the high number of hysterectomies he's performed that she referred to him as the uterus collector in her report. Unfortunately, a year and a half later, the women who were violated while in ICE custody have received no justice. The idea that anyone has the right to remove your ability to have children is a complete violation of the very core of human rights. Then to lie to someone and tell them they're going to the doctor for a different procedure, to then be sterilized, is just unfathomable. People are supposed to go to the doctor and trust that they'll be taken care of. Not only have the victims had their right to have children taken away, but they had their trust in doctors completely destroyed. All of these women trusted their doctors to treat them based on the oath they took to do no harm, yet they still performed unnecessary surgery to destroy much more than they fixed. They caused far more pain in the world than they could have ever eliminated. Thanks for letting us tell you this sinister story. If you enjoyed it, subscribe on whatever platform you're on and hit like, rate it, or leave a comment. Join us next week where we'll take you somewhere sinister.